Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stepped onto the Naval Special Warfare Training Grounds at 5:30 hours, her gear bag slung over one shoulder, and her custom rifle case gripped firmly in her other hand. The morning sun had just begun to cast long shadows across the range where America's most elite snipers had gathered for the annual inter-service precision shooting competition. The air smelled of gun oil, fresh coffee, and testosterone-fueled confidence. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as operators noticed her approaching. At 5'4" with her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, wearing standard-issue fatigues that somehow looked too big on her small frame, she looked more like someone's younger sister than a serious competitor. Certainly not someone who belonged among the battle-hardened warriors assembled here. "Check the roster again," a barrel-chested SEAL muttered to his teammate, not bothering to lower his voice. "Think they sent us the coffee girl by mistake." Ripples of laughter spread through the group like wildfire. Nearby, a Marine Scout sniper elbowed his buddy. "Maybe she's lost. Someone should point her toward the admin building." Chief Petty Officer Jake Hawkins stood at the center of the largest group, his presence commanding attention even among these elite operators. At 6'2" with arms like steel cables and a face chiseled from granite, he embodied everything the media portrayed as the perfect special operator. His reputation preceded him: three-time defending champion, over 50 confirmed kills in combat, and an ego to match his considerable skills. He looked Sarah up and down with barely concealed contempt. "Participation trophy right there, boys," Hawk announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "Pentagon's diversity project just walked in. Probably never fired anything bigger than a 9mm at a paper target." The laughter grew louder, more pointed. A few operators exchanged knowing glances. They'd all heard the rumors about integrated programs, about lowered standards and political correctness infecting even the most sacred spaces of military excellence. To many of them, Sarah's presence here wasn't just questionable, it was offensive. $20 says she doesn't make it past qualification," someone called out. "I'll take that bet," another voice replied. "20 says she doesn't even complete the first string." Sarah's expression never changed. Her face remained a mask of calm professionalism, though inside, familiar emotions stirred, not anger exactly, but something colder and more focused. She'd heard it all before. In boot camp, instructors had questioned whether she could handle a rucksack march. In advanced training, teammates had assumed she'd fail the physical requirements. On her first deployment, a lieutenant had tried to assign her to administrative duties despite her qualifications. Words were just noise. The target never cared who pulled the trigger, what gender they were, or what anyone thought about them. Physics didn't discriminate, ballistics didn't have opinions, and neither did she. She found her assigned station, number 7 on the firing line, and set down her gear with deliberate care. While around her, operators engaged in the time-honored ritual of pre-competition posturing, swapping war stories and comparing equipment with the casual arrogance of men who'd never been seriously challenged. Sarah began her pre-shoot inspection with the focused precision of a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. She opened her rifle case and lifted out her custom weapon, a beautiful piece of engineering she'd modified herself over years of refinement. Every component had been carefully selected, tested, and integrated. The stock had been custom-fitted to her build. The trigger had been adjusted to exactly 3 pounds of pull. The scope had been painstakingly zeroed across multiple ranges and weather conditions. "Nice rifle," a voice said nearby. She looked up to see a young Army Ranger, probably mid-20s, with sincere eyes. "Custom build?" "Mostly," Sarah replied simply, appreciating that his question seemed genuine rather than mocking. "Corporal Danny Reeves," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Sarah Chen." She shook it briefly before returning to her inspection. Danny seemed about to say more when Hawk's voice boomed across the range. "Hey Reeves, stop fraternizing with the diversity hire and get your head in the game, unless you want to finish last behind her." More laughter followed. Danny's face reddened, but he nodded to Sarah and moved back to his station. She didn't blame him. Tribal loyalty ran deep in this community, and he was smart enough not to alienate himself on her behalf. Colonel Marcus Briggs watched the entire scene unfold from the observation tower, his weathered face revealing nothing. At 62, with 38 years in the Marine Corps and more combat deployments than he cared to count, he'd seen every kind of operator. He'd also seen every kind of prejudice, every variety of toxic masculinity, and every flavor of insecurity masquerading as confidence. He lifted his binoculars and focused on Sarah as she worked. Her movements were efficient, methodical, completely unbothered by the circus around her. Briggs had reviewed her file before approving her entry into the competition. What he'd read had been extraordinary. Olympic-level competitive shooting before she'd even graduated high school, top scores in every marksmanship qualification the Navy offered, and a classified service record that he wasn't cleared to fully access, but that had come with glowing recommendations from people whose opinions he trusted. This week, Briggs thought, was about to get very interesting. These arrogant bastards had no idea what was about to hit them. The range officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. All competitors to the briefing tent in 5 minutes. I say again, all competitors to the briefing tent in 5 minutes. Sarah secured her rifle, locked her case, and started walking. As she passed Hawk's group, she heard him say, just loud enough for her to catch, "Wonder how long before she washes out. I give her until lunch." She didn't break stride, didn't acknowledge the comment, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, something cold and sharp crystallized into pure determination. They wanted a show. She'd give them one they'd never forget. The briefing tent felt like a sauna despite the early hour. 32 competitors, the best snipers from every branch of the U.S. military, crowded onto folding chairs as Colonel Briggs took the podium. Sarah sat in the back row, aware of the empty seats on either side of her while men packed together elsewhere like sardines. "Gentlemen," Briggs began, then paused deliberately, his eyes finding Sarah. "And lady, welcome to the 15th Annual Inter-Service Precision Shooting Competition. Over the next 5 days, you'll face challenges designed to test every aspect of your craft. Today is qualification, basic but essential. You'll engage targets at 600, 800, and 1,000 yards. 15 shots total. Score below 90%, you're out." Hawk leaned over to his teammate. 90%. My grandmother could qualify at 90%. Briggs continued, ignoring the murmur. "Weather conditions are ideal today. Light wind, clear visibility. No excuses. We'll proceed in roster order. Questions?" No hands went up. "Then, let's separate the professionals from the pretenders." The competitors filed out to the range, where 15 firing positions had been prepared. Sarah drew position 7 again, middle of the pack. Hawk had position 1. He'd shoot first, setting the tone. And he knew it. "Shooter ready on position 1, the range officer called. Hawk dropped into position with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. His rifle seemed like an extension of his body. He controlled his breathing, acquired the target, and fired in one smooth motion. "Hit center mass, 600 yards, the spotter confirmed. Hawk cycled through all 15 shots in under 4 minutes. Every single round found the target, most within the high-scoring inner rings. When he stood, his cocky grin had returned full force. 97%, the scorer announced. "Excellent shooting, Chief." Hawk walked past the other competitors, accepting fist bumps and congratulations. As he passed Sarah, he stopped. "That's how it's done, Lieutenant Commander. Think you can manage to at least hit the berm?" Several operators snickered. Sarah met his eyes with an expression of perfect neutrality. "We'll see, Chief." 5 more shooters went. All qualified easily, posting scores between 91 and 95%. These were elite operators. Qualification standards that would challenge regular military snipers were routine for them. "Shooter ready on position 7. Sarah moved to the firing line, acutely aware of every eye on her. She could feel the weight of their skepticism, their expectations of failure, their barely concealed hope that she'd embarrass herself and validate their prejudices. She set down her rifle and began her pre-shot routine. First, she requested a spotter check, standard protocol that every instructor hammered into students, but that experienced shooters often skipped out of overconfidence or machismo. "You can't be serious," Hawk's voice carried across the range. "A spotter check. What are you, fresh out of basic?" Laughter erupted from the crowd of waiting shooters. Even some of the range officers smirked. "That's like asking permission to breathe," someone else called out. "Maybe she needs someone to hold her hand, too." The mockery built on itself, each comment encouraging the next. Sarah ignored it all. She waited patiently while the range officer verified her scope settings, confirmed her position was safe, and checked her target assignments. By the book, every single step. "Spotter check complete. Shooter, you may proceed when ready." Sarah settled behind her rifle. The laughter continued behind her, but it was already fading into background noise. Her world narrowed, peripheral vision dimmed. The chattering voices became like distant wind, present but meaningless. She found the target at 600 yards through her scope, a black circle on white paper, crisp and clear in the morning light. Her breathing slowed automatically, following patterns her mother had taught her 20 years ago during biathlon training. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out, hold. Her heart rate dropped from 70 beats per minute to 55. Her hands, already steady, became absolutely still. She exhaled halfway and squeezed the trigger with gradual increasing pressure. 3 pounds, smooth and consistent. Crack! The rifle's recoil pushed back against her shoulder, familiar and comfortable. She rode it naturally, already cycling the bolt for the next shot. "Dead center, 600 yards. The spotter's voice crackled over the radio, professional but with an edge of surprise. Sarah didn't pause to celebrate or acknowledge the hit. She found her breathing rhythm again and fired. Crack! Dead center, 600 yards. Crack! Dead center, 600 yards. Behind her, the laughter had stopped. An uncomfortable silence settled over the range, broken only by the rhythmic crack of her rifle. 3 shots at 600 yards, 3 perfect impacts. The target switched to 800 yards. The wind had picked up slightly, a 3-mile-per-hour breeze from the east. Sarah made a minor adjustment to her point of aim and continued firing. Crack, center mass, 800 yards. Crack, dead center, 800 yards. Crack, dead center, 800 yards. Hawk's grin had completely vanished. He stood with his arms crossed, watching with an expression somewhere between disbelief and growing concern. Around him, other competitors had stopped their casual banter and were watching in silence. The range officer moved the targets to 1,000 yards, the maximum distance for qualification. At this range, the targets looked like tiny dots even through a high-powered scope. Wind, humidity, even the rotation of the earth became factors. Most shooters were satisfied just hitting the target at all. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, accounting for the increased distance. Her calculations were automatic now, mathematical equations her father had taught her manifesting as intuition. Wind speed, air pressure, temperature, humidity, all the variables clicked together in her mind like puzzle pieces. Crack! The bullet's flight time was noticeable at this distance, nearly 2 full seconds from firing to impact. Through his spotting scope, the range officer watched the round's path. Dead center, 1,000 yards. Crack! Dead center, 1,000 yards. Crack! Dead center, 1,000 yards. The silence was absolute now. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Sarah fired her 15th and final shot with the same mechanical precision as the first. Crack! Dead center, 1,000 yards. She engaged the safety, cleared her weapon, and stood. Her face showed no emotion, no pride, no satisfaction, no acknowledgement of what she'd just accomplished. She simply gathered her brass, secured her rifle, and stepped back from the firing line. The scorer's voice trembled slightly. 100%, perfect score. 15 shots, 15 dead center hits. Colonel Briggs lowered his binoculars slowly. In 15 years of running this competition, with hundreds of the military's best snipers competing, no one had ever shot a perfect qualification round. The odds of it were astronomical. Even the legendary Carlos Hathcock would have called it exceptional shooting. Danny Reeves, still waiting his turn to shoot, let out a low whistle. "Holy shit," he whispered. Hawk stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and something he rarely experienced: doubt. The woman he'd dismissed as a diversity hire, the shooter he'd mocked mercilessly, had just demonstrated a level of precision he'd never achieved in his entire career. Sarah walked past him without a word, without even a glance. She didn't need to gloat. The scoreboard said everything. As she reached the equipment area, she heard Hawk's voice behind her, quieter now, speaking to his teammate. That shouldn't be possible." Sarah allowed herself the smallest smile, where no one could see it. The competition had officially begun. The chow hall buzzed with subdued conversation that evening, a marked change from the boisterous atmosphere that had filled it at breakfast. Word of Sarah's perfect qualification round had spread through the entire base like wildfire. Operators who hadn't even been at the range were talking about it. Some claimed it was beginner's luck. Others whispered about possible equipment advantages or modified ammunition. A few, very few, simply acknowledged what they'd witnessed: exceptional shooting. Sarah sat alone at a corner table, a tray of barely touched food in front of her. She changed out of her range clothes into a simple gray navy t-shirt and tactical pants. Her hair, freed from its regulation bun, hung past her shoulders. She looked younger this way, more approachable, but the isolation bubble around her remained intact. 3 tables over, groups of competitors laughed and exchanged stories. No one approached her section of the hall. She didn't mind. Solitude had always been her refuge, even as a child. She pulled out a small notebook and began reviewing the day's data: wind conditions, temperature changes throughout the shoot, her heart rate at each firing position. Every variable mattered. Every data point could mean the difference between a perfect shot and a near miss. "Ma'am." Sarah looked up to see Corporal Danny Reeves standing a respectful distance away, holding his own dinner tray. The young Army Ranger's face showed genuine curiosity mixed with nervousness, like a student approaching a professor after class. "May I?" He gestured to the empty seat across from her. Sarah considered him for a moment. His question at the range had been sincere, not mocking. His eyes held respect, not resentment. She nodded. Danny sat down carefully, as if joining her was somehow breaking an unspoken rule, which, in a way, it was. The tribal dynamics here were complex. Sitting with the outsider could mark him as an outsider too. "That shooting today," Danny began, shaking his head. "I've been in the Rangers for 6 years. I've trained with some of the best snipers in the Army. I've never seen anything like that. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah closed her notebook. "Montana, small town called Whitefish up in the Rockies. Started when I was 6 years old." 6, Danny's eyebrows shot up. "That's young." "My mother was an Olympic biathlon coach, cross-country skiing and rifle shooting. She believed in starting early." Sarah's expression softened slightly at the memory. "I could barely hold the rifle at first. She had to help me support the weight, but she was patient. Every morning before school we'd go to the range. Weekends we'd spend hours in the mountains." "What about your father?" "Mathematics professor at Montana State University. He taught me the science behind shooting, ballistics, environmental factors, probability theory." A slight smile crossed her face. "Most kids got bedtime stories. I got lectures about the Coriolis effect and how the Earth's rotation impacts long-range trajectories." Danny laughed, some of his nervousness fading. "That sounds like a unique childhood." "It was isolated," Sarah admitted. "Other kids thought I was weird. While they were at dance recitals and soccer practice, I was calculating wind drift and memorizing ballistic coefficients. But I loved it. The precision, the science, the way everything had to come together perfectly for that one moment when you squeezed the trigger." "You said you competed internationally." Sarah nodded. "Junior biathlon circuit from age 12 to 18. Won nationals 3 times. Placed 4th at Junior Worlds in Norway when I was 17. I had scholarship offers from MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, all full rides for their shooting teams and academic programs." "So why the Navy?" Danny asked. Why give up a free Ivy League education to enlist? Sarah's expression grew distant. September 11, 2001. I was a senior in high school, sitting in calculus class when the towers fell. We all watched it on TV, the smoke, the people jumping, the collapse. And I remember thinking that all my shooting skills, all that precision I developed was for competition, for scoring points and winning medals. She paused, her voice quieter now. Some equations matter more than others, Corporal. I decided that day that I wanted my skills to count for something real, something that protected people instead of just impressing judges. Your parents must have been devastated when you enlisted instead of going to MIT. My father understood intellectually, even if it broke his heart. My mother, Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't speak to me for 2 years. She'd spent her whole life coaching me for the Olympics, and I threw it away, her words, to play soldier. Do you regret it? Never, the word came without hesitation. I enlisted in 2002, made it through boot camp despite drill instructors who thought women didn't belong in combat roles. Qualified expert marksman with every weapon system they put in my hands. Then in 2015, when the Navy opened SEAL training to women as part of an experimental integrated program, I volunteered. Danny's eyes widened. You went through Bud S. Class 334, started with 142 candidates. 23 graduated. I was one of them. Sarah's voice held no pride, just statement of fact. First week, they called me Sweet Pea and took bets on when I'd ring the bell. By Hell Week, they stopped betting. By the end, some of them were asking me for advice on staying mentally strong during surf torture. Jesus, Danny breathed. I've heard stories about Bud S. the cold, the sleep deprivation, instructors literally trying to break you. It's designed to find your breaking point and then push you past it, Sarah confirmed. Most people quit because their bodies fail, but bodies can be trained. It's the mind that gives up first. My mother taught me that during biathlon training, your body can do far more than your brain thinks it can. You just have to learn to ignore the voice telling you to stop. Around them, the chow hall had grown quieter. Sarah noticed several tables of operators watching their conversation, including Hawk's table. The SEAL sat with his back to them, but his body language was tense, shoulders rigid. After Bud S., Danny prompted. Advanced training, close quarters combat, high-altitude operations, maritime insertions, then deployments. Sarah's expression closed off slightly. I can't discuss most of what I've done for the past 5 years, classified, but I've been downrange, Corporal. I've made shots that mattered in conditions that make today's qualification look like a kindergarten exercise. How many? Danny started, then stopped himself. Sorry, that's not appropriate to ask. It's okay, I don't keep count. Sarah's voice was quiet. Every shot I've taken in combat was necessary. Every target was a threat. I don't celebrate them and I don't lose sleep over them. They were math problems that needed solving. Danny studied her face. That's a very clinical way to look at it. It's the only way I can look at it and still function. Sarah met his eyes directly. I'm not a warrior poet, Corporal. I don't romanticize what we do. I'm a tool, a very precise, very specialized tool. Point me at a problem that requires a bullet traveling at 2,800 feet per second to solve, and I'll solve it. Everything else is just noise. A figure appeared at their table. Both Sarah and Danny looked up to see a tall Marine Scout sniper, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, holding his coffee cup. Chen, he said simply, that qualification round, been shooting for 22 years, never seen anything like it, just wanted to say respect. He nodded once and walked away. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Danny saw Sarah's shoulders relax infinitesimally. Not everyone here is like Hawk, Danny said. I know, but Hawk's the 3-time champion. Hawk's the alpha, and I just challenged his dominance in front of everyone. Sarah gathered her notebook and tray. This competition just became personal for him. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. As she stood to leave, Danny called after her. Hey, ma'am, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. You're raising everyone's game. Sarah paused, then nodded. Get some rest, Corporal. Tomorrow's wind shooting. It's going to separate the good from the lucky. She walked away, leaving Danny to contemplate what he'd learned. Across the hall, Hawk finally turned to watch her go, his expression unreadable. The battle lines had been drawn, and tomorrow the real competition would begin. Day 2 arrived with weather that made the range officers smile and the competitors grimace. Dark clouds rolled across the sky like invading armies, and wind gusts exceeded 25 miles per hour, turning the flags into horizontal streamers. Rain came in sporadic bursts, cold and stinging. This was the kind of weather that separated textbook shooters from true operators, who made shots in Afghanistan's mountains or Iraq's desert storms. Today's challenge, Colonel Briggs announced over the range's PA system, his voice crackling with static, is adaptive shooting under adverse conditions. You'll engage targets at varying distances with wind speeds and directions that will change throughout your shoot. No two competitors will face identical conditions. This tests your ability to read the environment and adjust in real time, just like combat. Sarah stood at her station, rain dripping off the brim of her cap, studying the wind flags positioned at intervals downrange. They whipped chaotically, showing gusts from multiple directions. At 600 yards, the wind blew predominantly from the west. At 800, it seemed to swirl from the northwest. At 1,000 yards, it was anyone's guess. "This is real shooting," Hawk announced to his nearby teammates, loud enough to carry. "Not some climate-controlled range where conditions are perfect. Let's see how the Prodigy handles actual field conditions." The morning session was brutal. Experienced shooters posted scores in the low 80s, respectable given the conditions, but far below their usual standards. A Navy SEAL from Team 3, a solid operator with years of deployments, scored only 72%. An Army Special Forces sniper, known for his Afghanistan mountain work, managed 85% but looked frustrated doing it. Hawk shot in the second rotation. Despite the conditions, he was magnificent, reading wind patterns with the instinct of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in worse situations. He made adjustments on the fly, compensating for sudden gusts, and posted a 91%. The gathered operators erupted in applause. It was championship-level shooting in championship-level conditions. "That's how it's done," someone shouted. Hawk stood rain-soaked and grinning. "Beat that," he said, looking directly at Sarah. When her turn came, Sarah approached the line methodically. She'd been watching every shooter, noting how the wind patterns shifted, where the gusts originated, how long they lasted. Her father's mathematics and her mother's field experience merged in her mind, creating a predictive model. She settled into position and began her first shot sequence. The wind hit from the left, then shifted right, then died completely for exactly 4 seconds before gusting again. She waited for the pattern to repeat, and it did. She fired during the dead zone. "Hit center mass, 600 yards. The spotter's voice carried the same surprised tone it had during qualification. Through the rain and wind, Sarah continued to find her rhythm, waiting for those brief windows when chaos became predictable. By her 10th shot, she'd posted a 94%, higher than Hawk in worse conditions. The murmuring among spectators grew louder. Then came the night shoot. As darkness fell, competitors switched to night vision equipment. This added another layer of complexity. The scopes amplified available light, but also amplified any movement or instability. Shooting through night vision required absolute stillness and a different kind of concentration. Sarah was halfway through her night sequence, controlling her breathing for a critical 800-yard shot, when a loud metallic crash erupted directly behind her. Her concentration shattered for a split second, long enough to throw off most shooters completely. Several competitors turned to see Hawk standing near his equipment area, a metal ammunition case lying on the ground at his feet. "Sorry," he called out, not sounding sorry at all. "Slipped out of my hands." The range officer looked ready to intervene, but there was no rule against accidents. Sarah had already refocused, her mind blocking out the distraction with the discipline her mother had drilled into her during biathlon competitions, where spectators deliberately tried to break skiers' concentration. She compensated for the split-second disruption, adjusted her point of aim slightly to account for the interrupted breathing cycle, and fired. Hit dead center, 800 yards. The shot was perfect. Better than perfect, it demonstrated complete mental control under deliberate pressure. Danny Reeves, watching from the sidelines, shook his head in disgust at Hawk's obvious attempt to rattle her. Several other operators looked away, uncomfortable with the unsportsmanlike conduct, but unwilling to call out a three-time champion. The night shoot concluded with Sarah posting 96%, the highest score of the day. Hawk came in second at 91%. The gap between them was closing, but in Sarah's favor. As competitors cleared their equipment, Hawk approached Sarah near the cleaning station. His face was flushed. Whether from exertion or anger, it was hard to tell. "You've had help," he said, his voice low and tight. "Special accommodations. Maybe somebody pre-briefed you on the wind patterns. There's no way." Sarah turned to face him fully, her expression calm but her eyes hard as gunmetal. "The target doesn't care about your ego, Chief." Her voice was quiet but cut through the ambient noise like a knife. "Neither do I. You can question my gender all you want, but you can't question that scoreboard." Hawk's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. "This isn't over." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not. 4 more days, Chief. May the best shooter win." "I am the best shooter," Hawk shot back. "Then you have nothing to worry about." Sarah's tone was perfectly professional, which somehow made it more cutting than any insult could have been. Other operators had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. The tribal dynamics Sarah had sensed were now on full display. Some men stood clearly with Hawk, their teammate, their champion, their brother-in-arms. Others watched with more neutral expressions, their loyalty to tradition warring with the objective reality of the scores. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, the Marine who'd acknowledged Sarah the previous evening, spoke up from the edge of the crowd. "Scoreboard don't lie, Hawk. She's outshot you 2 days straight. Maybe focus on your own game instead of making excuses." Hawk whirled on him. "You taking her side, Rodriguez?" "I'm taking the side of professional shooting," the Marine replied evenly. "You taught me that, remember, 3 years ago when I was making excuses for missing that 700-yard shot in Helmand. You told me, the bullet doesn't care about your feelings. Either you made the shot or you didn't. Well, Chief, she's making the shots." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Hawk looked around at the faces watching him, seeing his own words reflected back. His expression cycled through anger, frustration, and something deeper, the first real seed of doubt in his own supremacy. "We'll see how she handles tomorrow," he finally said. "Moving targets, dynamic scenarios, that's operator work, not competition shooting." He stalked off into the darkness, his team trailing behind him. The crowd dispersed slowly, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Danny approached Sarah as she packed her night vision equipment. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though her hands worked faster than usual, betraying some tension. "He's rattled. That makes him dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Sarah paused, considering her words carefully. When someone's identity is built on being the best, and that identity gets challenged, they either rise to meet the challenge or they tear down the challenger. Hawk doesn't seem like the type to rise gracefully. "You think he'll try something?" "I think tomorrow will be interesting." Sarah closed her equipment case. "Get some rest, Corporal. Moving targets require different skills. You'll need to be sharp." As she walked toward the barracks, Colonel Briggs watched from the observation tower, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, sir, I'm aware of the dynamics," he said to whoever was on the other end. "No, sir, I don't believe intervention is necessary yet. This is exactly what this competition is supposed to test, not just shooting skills but character under pressure. We'll see who these men really are when their assumptions get challenged." "Yes, sir. I'll keep you informed." He hung up and looked out at the dark range, rain still falling steadily. This competition had become something larger than anyone had anticipated. The question was no longer just who was the best shot. It was whether excellence could transcend prejudice, whether merit could overcome tribalism, and whether the special operations community was ready to evolve. The next 3 days would provide the answer. Day 4 dawned clear and cold. the storm system having blown through overnight. The air had that crystalline quality that made distant objects appear closer than they were, deceptive for inexperienced shooters, but a gift for those who understood atmospheric optics. Sarah arrived at the range before sunrise, wanting time alone to prepare mentally for what she knew would be the competition's crucible. Colonel Briggs had announced yesterday that Day 4 would feature the legendary impossible shot, a single attempt at 1,500 yards in variable wind conditions. One bullet, one chance. No do-overs, no second attempts. It was the kind of shot that separated competent snipers from legendary ones, the kind of shot that got whispered about in operator bars for years afterward. 1,500 yards, nearly 9/10 of a mile. At that distance, the bullet would drop over 400 inches and spend almost 3 full seconds in flight. The Coriolis effect, the Earth's rotation, would deflect the round several inches. Temperature, humidity, altitude, and a dozen other variables all became critical factors. And the wind. The wind could push a bullet several feet off course. "Morning, ma'am." Sarah turned to see Danny approaching, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one without asking if she wanted it. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, accepting the cup gratefully. "Kept thinking about today's shoot," Danny admitted. 1,500 yards, one shot. I've never attempted anything beyond 1,200 in training. This is," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Terrifying," Sarah supplied. "I was going to say humbling." Danny sipped his coffee. "Yesterday, Hawk pulled me aside, told me I was making a mistake associating with you, said when you washed out, his words, I'd be remembered as the guy who backed the wrong horse." "And what did you say?" "Told him the only horse I'm backing is good shooting, and that the scoreboard doesn't lie." Danny smiled slightly. He didn't like that much. Sarah studied the young ranger. "You're risking your reputation in this community for someone you barely know." "Maybe," Danny acknowledged. "But my dad taught me something before he died. He was a cop, shot and killed during a traffic stop when I was 16. He always said that character is what you do when it costs you something. Standing with you when you're winning is easy. Standing with you when guys like Hawk are pressuring me, that means something." Before Sarah could respond, other competitors began arriving. The atmosphere was different this morning, tense, anticipatory. Everyone knew today would likely determine the championship. Sarah and Hawk were separated by only 3 percentage points after 3 days. Whoever performed better at 1,500 yards would likely take an insurmountable lead. The briefing was short. Colonel Briggs explained the rules. Random draw for shooting order, 1 shot per competitor, scored on proximity to center mass. Wind conditions would be monitored but not announced. Each shooter had to read the environment themselves. "This is the shot that defines careers," Briggs told them, his gravelly voice carrying across the assembled operators. "Some of you will make it, most won't. All of you will learn something about yourselves today." The draw placed Hawk 3rd in the order. Sarah would shoot 27th, near the end. She'd have to watch nearly the entire field shoot before her turn came, the pressure building with each attempt. The first shooter, an Air Force pararescue sniper, missed the target entirely. His bullet impacted the berm 6 feet left. The wind had pushed him off course. He walked back shaking his head, embarrassed but philosophical. The second shooter, a Marine, hit the target but far outside the scoring rings. Still a respectable shot at that distance. Then came Hawk. He approached the firing line like a gladiator entering the arena, carrying himself with absolute confidence. His team called out encouragement. "Show them how it's done, Hawk. Championship shot right here." Hawk settled into position, his body language utterly composed. Sarah watched him work, recognizing the signs of someone operating at peak performance. He studied the wind flags for a full 2 minutes, watching patterns, calculating vectors. His breathing slowed to almost nothing. The range went silent. Crack! The sound of his shot echoed across the range, followed by an eternity of waiting as the bullet flew downrange. Through the high-powered spotting scope, the range officer tracked its path. "Hit," he called out, "scoring ring, just outside center mass. Excellent shot." The crowd erupted. Hawk's team mobbed him, slapping his back, shouting congratulations. It was an exceptional shot, maybe the best of his career. He'd landed just outside the kill zone, perhaps 4 inches from dead center. At 1,500 yards in variable wind, it was championship-caliber shooting. Hawk stood and looked directly at Sarah, his expression challenging. The message was clear: beat that. The next 23 shooters attempted the shot. Most missed the target entirely. A few hit the outer rings. Only 2 others, Rodriguez and an Army Delta operator, came close to Hawk's performance, and neither matched it. The pressure built like a rising tide as Sarah's turn approached. By the time her number was called, the tension on the range was palpable. Every competitor had finished except her. Hawk stood at the front of the gathered crowd, arms crossed, supremely confident. He'd posted the best shot of the day. Unless Sarah did something extraordinary, he'd won this round decisively. Shooter 27, position ready, the range officer called. Sarah walked to the firing line, her rifle case in hand. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to witness this moment. She could feel their eyes on her back, hear their whispered conversations. No way she matches Hawk's shot. That was literally perfect execution. She's been lucky, but luck runs out. Sarah set down her case and began unpacking methodically. She didn't rush, didn't let the pressure alter her routine. Equipment check. Scope verification, ammunition inspection, every step performed with surgical precision. She loaded a single round, a 190-grain Sierra Match King, precisely weighed and measured. At 1,500 yards, even a fraction of a grain variance in bullet weight could mean several inches of deviation. The wind flags showed chaos. At 300 yards, they indicated wind from the west at maybe 8 miles per hour. At 600 yards, northwest at 12. At 900 yards, the pattern shifted again. At 1,200 yards and beyond, the flags whipped in conflicting directions, showing turbulence and unpredictability. Sarah settled into position. The target looked impossibly small through her scope, even at maximum magnification. She studied the wind flags, looking for patterns within the chaos. Seconds ticked into minutes. "Sometime today, Lieutenant Commander," Hawk called out, unable to resist. "Or are you waiting for the wind to stop completely? Because that's not happening." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Sarah's finger rested outside the trigger guard. She didn't acknowledge the comment, didn't break her concentration. Her mind worked through calculations her father would have recognized. Differential equations solving for ballistic trajectory in 3-dimensional space with multiple variable wind vectors. But it was more than mathematics. It was feel, instinct, the kind of knowledge that came from 10,000 hours behind a rifle. She was reading micro-patterns in the wind flags, seeing the rhythm beneath the chaos. 5 minutes passed, then 6. The crowd grew restless. "Is she frozen?" someone whispered. "Maybe she's realized she can't make it." Then Sarah saw it, a pattern repeating every 43 seconds. The wind would gust hard from the west, then die for approximately 4 seconds, then shift northwest briefly before the cycle repeated. If she timed it perfectly, there would be a window, small, fleeting, but there. She waited for the next cycle. The western gust came right on schedule, died, the 4-second window opened. Sarah exhaled halfway, her heart rate dropping to 48 beats per minute. The rifle became an extension of her body. The target, the bullet, and her intention aligned into a single point of focus. She squeezed the trigger with smooth, increasing pressure. Crack! The recoil pushed back against her shoulder. The bullet left the barrel at 2,750 feet per second, beginning its long arc through the atmosphere. Sarah remained in position, watching through her scope, though at this distance she couldn't actually track the bullet's flight. The range went absolutely silent. 3 seconds felt like 3 hours. Through his spotting scope, the range officer watched the bullet's path. It climbed, arced, began its descent. The wind caught it, pushed it right, then left. It dropped toward the target, seeming to drift in slow motion. "Hit," the range officer's voice cracked with excitement. Dead center, perfect impact at 1,500 yards." For a moment nobody moved, nobody spoke. The impossible had just become real. Then the range exploded with sound, cheers, shouts, disbelief. Even hardened operators who'd seen combat in a dozen countries couldn't suppress their reactions. Rodriguez let out a rebel yell. Danny threw his cap in the air. Other competitors rushed forward to see the target verification. Sarah stood and saved her rifle, her expression unchanged. To her, it was simply the shot she'd calculated, executed properly. Hawk's face had gone pale, then red, cycling through emotions too fast to track. His mouth opened, then closed. For perhaps the first time in his career, Jake "Hawk" Hawkins was completely speechless. Colonel Briggs lowered his binoculars slowly, a broad smile crossing his weathered face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced over the PA system, "you just witnessed history." Sarah returned to the barracks that evening riding a wave of quiet satisfaction. Her 1,500-yard shot had put her 6 points ahead of Hawk in the overall standings with only 1 day remaining. The championship was within reach, not guaranteed, but possible. Probable even if she maintained her performance. The barracks were mostly empty, competitors still at the chow hall celebrating or commiserating depending on their day's results. Sarah preferred the solitude. She carried her rifle case to her assigned space, a small corner area separated from the main bay by a wall locker. Her routine was sacred, unchanging. Disassemble the rifle, clean every component, inspect for wear or damage, reassemble, verify zero. She'd performed this ritual thousands of times, could do it blindfolded if necessary. The familiar motions were meditative, calming. She opened her case and immediately froze. Something was wrong. The rifle's position had shifted slightly, not much, maybe a quarter inch, but enough. She always placed it with the scope turrets aligned precisely with the case's foam cutout. Now it was rotated slightly clockwise. Her cleaning kit, normally positioned on the right side, had been moved to the left. Someone had opened her case. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her hands remained steady as she lifted the rifle out. She began her inspection with heightened attention, looking for anything out of place. The stock felt normal. The barrel seemed fine. The trigger. Her fingers found the scope mounts. They moved. They shouldn't move, ever. She grabbed her torque wrench and checked the mounting screws. 2 of them had been loosened, not enough to be obvious, but enough that after a few shots the vibration would cause the scope to shift. At close range, it might not matter. At competition distances, it would be catastrophic. Her shots would impact increasingly off-target as the scope shifted, and she'd have no idea why. Sarah's jaw tightened. She continued the inspection with clinical precision. The barrel cleaning rod bent. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, but bent nonetheless. Using it could damage the barrel's rifling, destroying her accuracy permanently. This wasn't accident. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate sabotage. "Sarah." She spun to find Danny standing in the doorway, his expression concerned. "You weren't at dinner, I brought you." He stopped, seeing her face. "What's wrong?" "Someone tampered with my rifle." She showed him the loosened scope mounts, the bent cleaning rod. "This is sophisticated. Whoever did this knows weapons well enough to cause damage that wouldn't be immediately obvious." Danny's face darkened with anger. "Son of a bitch, we need to report this to Colonel Briggs immediately." "Agreed." 20 minutes later, they sat in Briggs's temporary office, a converted storage room in the base operations building. The colonel examined Sarah's rifle with the practiced eye of someone who'd been around weapons for 4 decades. His expression grew grimmer with each discovery. "This is professional-grade sabotage," he confirmed. "Designed to look like equipment failure rather than tampering. If you'd shot tomorrow without catching this." He shook his head. "Your first few shots might have been okay, but by mid-competition, your scope would have shifted enough to throw you completely off. You'd have looked incompetent and no one would know why." "Can we determine who did it?" Sarah asked. Briggs pulled out his phone and made a call. "Security, this is Colonel Briggs. I need to review surveillance footage from Barrack C, starting at 1400 today." "Yes, I'll wait." While they waited, Danny paced the small office like a caged animal. "This is bullshit. Whoever did this should be disqualified, court-martialed even. This isn't just cheating, it's destruction of government property. Easy, Corporal, Briggs cautioned. We need evidence, not assumptions. The security officer arrived 15 minutes later with a laptop. Sir, we have a problem. The camera covering that barracks section went offline at 14:30 hours. Technical malfunction, according to the logs, came back online at 15:20. How convenient, Briggs said dryly. And during that 50-minute window. No footage, sir, but the security officer pulled up another view. This camera covers the main entrance. I've got personnel entering and exiting during that time frame. They watched the footage together. Several competitors came and went. At 14:45, a group of 4 entered, all wearing the same style of tactical cap, all roughly the same build. They kept their faces angled away from the camera. Whether deliberately or coincidentally, it was impossible to tell. Can you identify any of them? Briggs asked. The security officer enhanced the image, but the resolution wasn't good enough. No positive IDs, sir, but based on their gear and the timing, I'd say these are SEAL team members. The way they move, their equipment setup. Briggs's eyes narrowed. Focus on the next hour who exits. At 15:18, 3 figures emerged. Again, faces obscured. At 15:34, a 4th person exited, this one carrying what looked like a small toolkit. Freeze that frame, Briggs ordered. Zoom in on the toolkit. The image pixelated as it enlarged, but Sarah could make out enough. That's a Leatherman Moot multi-utility tool, designed specifically for weapons maintenance, has torque-adjustable bits. Can we trace toolkit ownership? Danny asked. Half the operators here carry Leathermans, the security officer said, but the Moot model is more specialized, mostly issued to armorers and advanced weapons techs. Briggs made another call, this one to the competition armorer. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at Sarah and Danny. 3 people checked out Moot toolkits from the armory today. 2 Army Rangers, both can account for their time, and witnesses confirmed they were at the range. The 3rd. He paused significantly. Chief Petty Officer Jake Hawkins checked it out at 14:35, returned it at 15:40. The timeline matched perfectly with the camera blackout and the barracks intrusion. Danny exploded. That's it, he's done. Disqualify him, Colonel, this is clear evidence. It's circumstantial, Briggs interrupted. Hawkins could claim he needed the toolkit for his own equipment. The camera malfunction could genuinely be coincidence. We can't prove he was in that barracks or that he touched Lieutenant Commander Chen's rifle. So he gets away with it. Danny's voice rose with frustration. I didn't say that. Briggs's tone was ice cold. I said we can't prove it legally, but I can have a very pointed conversation with the chief about integrity, honor, and what happens to operators who violate both. He looked at Sarah. Lieutenant Commander, you have options. I can offer you a replacement rifle from our armory, a top-tier weapon already zeroed, or I can give you time and resources to repair your current rifle. Tomorrow's competition doesn't start until 900. You'd have, he checked his watch, approximately 13 hours. If I switch rifles, I'll compromise my performance, Sarah said immediately. Every weapon has unique characteristics, trigger pull, recoil pattern, balance. I've spent years with my rifle. I know it intimately. A new weapon, even an excellent one, would put me at a disadvantage. Then you'll rebuild tonight, Briggs said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. I'll authorize access to the armory workshop. Full tool access, and I'll assign a witness to document your repairs. Everything by the book. Danny stood. I'm staying with her, all night if necessary. I appreciate that, Corporal, but Sarah began. With respect, ma'am, I'm staying. You need a witness and you need someone watching your back. Whoever did this might try something else. Before Sarah could argue, the door opened. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez stood there with 2 other Marines. Heard there was a problem. We're here to help. Within the hour, word had spread through a select group of competitors, those who valued integrity over tribal loyalty. 7 operators assembled in the armory workshop. 3 Marines, 2 Army Rangers, one Air Force pararescue, and Danny. They set up a perimeter, one always watching the door while the others assisted or witnessed Sarah's work. She started by completely disassembling the rifle. Every screw, every pin, every component laid out on a clean mat. She replaced the bent cleaning rod with a new one from armory stock, documented and signed for. She retorqued the scope mounts to exact specifications, then added thread locker to prevent future tampering. The hours blurred together. Midnight came and went. Sarah's hands never wavered, but exhaustion began showing around her eyes. Rodriguez brought coffee. Danny ran to the chow hall and returned with sandwiches that Sarah barely touched. At 300, she finished reassembly. Now came the critical part, re-zeroing the rifle. They moved to an indoor range, and Sarah began the painstaking process of confirming her zero at multiple distances. Each shot had to be perfect. Each adjustment had to be precise. At 4:30, the armory door opened. Colonel Briggs entered, followed by Chief Petty Officer Hawkins. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Briggs's face was carved from granite. Chief Hawkins has something to say. Hawk looked like he'd been through a psychological meat grinder. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. When he spoke, the words seemed dragged from somewhere deep and painful. Lieutenant Commander Chen, he stopped, started again. What happened to your equipment was unacceptable. Regardless of who did it, I want you to know that I had nothing to do with it. Sarah said nothing, just watched him with those dark, unreadable eyes. I've been informed, Hawk continued, his voice strained, that my toolkit was checked out during the time frame when the incident occurred. I logged it out to perform maintenance on my own weapon. I was at the range the entire time, but I understand how this looks. Do you? Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a question. Hawk's facade cracked slightly. I've been a SEAL for 12 years. I've operated in 17 countries. I've earned every commendation, every qualification, every recognition I have. And then you show up and, he struggled for words. You're better than me. I didn't want to believe it. Hell, I still don't want to believe it, but the scores don't lie. No, Sarah agreed, they don't. Tomorrow's the final day. I'm going to shoot the best I've ever shot. And if you beat me, Hawk took a deep breath, then you beat me, fair and square, because that's what operators do. We compete at the highest level and we accept the results. He extended his hand. Sarah looked at it for a long moment, then at Briggs, then at the assembled operators who'd given up their sleep to support her. Finally, she looked back at Hawk. She didn't take his hand. Actions earn respect, Chief, not words. Tomorrow shoot your best, I'll shoot mine. We'll let the targets decide. Hawk's hand dropped. He nodded once, then turned and left without another word. Briggs lingered. You didn't have to be that hard on him. Yes, Sarah said, turning back to her rifle. I did. Because if I'd accepted that handshake every time I win something, people will say he let me. I don't want his permission to excel, Colonel. I don't want his blessing. I want to beat him so decisively that nobody, not him, not his teammates, not anyone, can ever question whether I earned it. Briggs smiled slightly. Get some rest, Lieutenant Commander. You've got about 3 hours before you need to be at the range. I'll sleep when the competition's over, sir. She went back to work, and the operators who'd stayed all night settled in for a few more hours. They were witnesses now to something larger than a shooting competition. They were witnesses to the changing of an era. Dawn broke over the range with the kind of perfect clarity that made distant mountains look close enough to touch. Sarah stood alone at the edge of the firing line, her rebuilt rifle cradled in her arms, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She'd managed maybe 90 minutes of sleep, fragmented, restless, haunted by the weight of what this day meant. Her eyes burned with fatigue. Her shoulders ached from the hours spent hunched over her rifle, rebuilding it piece by piece. But her hands were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. Behind her, the parking area filled with vehicles. Word had spread beyond the competition itself. Base personnel, off-duty operators, even some local media had gotten wind of the unprecedented showdown between the 3-time champion and the unknown female SEAL who'd come out of nowhere to challenge him. The crowd was easily 3 times larger than any previous day. Colonel Briggs took the podium at precisely 900 hours, his voice amplified across the range. Gentlemen and lady, welcome to the final day of the 15th Annual Inter-Service Precision Shooting Competition. Today's event simulates a real-world hostage rescue scenario. You will engage a high-value target at 800 yards while avoiding multiple non-combatant targets that will appear at random intervals. He paused, letting the difficulty sink in. But first, you'll complete a 2-mile combat conditioning run in full kit, 50 pounds of gear, plate carrier, helmet, weapon. This simulates the physical stress of actual operations. You'll shoot immediately upon completion while your heart rate is elevated, your hands are shaking, and your body is screaming for oxygen. This is what separates range shooters from war fighters. The assembled competitors shifted uneasily. A 2-mile run in full gear was punishing under any circumstances. To shoot with precision immediately afterward required mental fortitude beyond most people's capacity. Scoring is simple, Briggs continued. Hit the hostile target, avoid the hostages. Time starts when you cross the start line and ends when you make a confirmed hit. Miss the hostile or hit a hostage, you're disqualified from this event. Your cumulative score from the previous 4 days stands, but you cannot win the championship. The stakes were absolute. Everything came down to this. Chief Hawkins will shoot first as the current leader. Lieutenant Commander Chen will shoot last as the challenger. Questions? Silence. Then let's begin. Hawk approached the start line, his team surrounding him with final words of encouragement. He looked focused, determined, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew what was at stake, not just the championship, but his identity as the best. His entire self-concept rested on this moment. The starting horn blared. Hawk exploded from the line, his powerful legs eating up ground. The 2-mile course wound through the base's training area, flat sections, hills, obstacles that had to be navigated. Sarah watched on the large display screen as cameras tracked his progress. His form was textbook perfect, his pace brutal but sustainable. 14 minutes, 32 seconds later, Hawk crossed the finish line. His chest heaved, sweat poured down his face, but he immediately transitioned to his weapon. No pause, no recovery time. He dropped into firing position, his rifle coming up even as his body screamed for rest. Through the spotting scope, observers could see his hands trembling. Adrenaline, fatigue, elevated heart rate all conspiring against precision. The target waited at 800 yards. Hostile in the center, hostage targets flanking it on both sides, all appearing and disappearing at random intervals. Hawk controlled his breathing, 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. His heart rate began to drop. 30 seconds passed, 40. His finger moved to the trigger. A hostage target popped up directly in front of the hostile. Hawk held his fire. The hostage dropped. The hostile appeared alone for exactly 3 seconds. Crack. Miss, the range officer called. Repeat shot required. Hawk's jaw clenched. He'd pulled it left in his fatigue, missing by perhaps 6 inches. He cycled the bolt, reacquired the target. This time he waited longer, letting his heart rate drop further despite knowing the clock was running. The hostile appeared again. Hawk fired. Hit time, 16 minutes 18 seconds. Respectable, excellent even, but not perfect. Hawk stood, knowing he'd left the door open. If Sarah could beat his time with a good shot, the championship was hers. 13 more competitors attempted the course. Most failed spectacularly, hitting hostages, missing entirely, or collapsing from exhaustion before completing the run. 2 posted times faster than Hawk's run, but missed their shots. 1 Army Ranger made his shot but took over 20 minutes total. Rodriguez went early in the rotation. He completed the run in 15 minutes, but his shot, though accurate, brought his total time to 18 minutes. Danny finished his run strong, but his hands were shaking too badly. 3 attempts before he hit the hostile, final time over 22 minutes. Finally, only Sarah remained. She stepped to the start line, very aware of the hundreds of eyes on her. The crowd had swelled to nearly 500 people, the largest audience this competition had ever drawn. News cameras filmed everything. This wasn't just a shooting competition anymore. It had become symbolic of something larger, something that transcended marksmanship. Danny stood at the sideline with Rodriguez and the others who'd supported her through the night. "You've got this," he called out. Sarah adjusted her plate carrier, checked her rifle sling, and took a deep breath. Her body was running on fumes, less than 2 hours of sleep in the past 48 hours, the emotional toll of the sabotage, the pressure of this moment. Every logical part of her brain said she was at a disadvantage. But her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Your body can do far more than your brain thinks it can. You just have to ignore the voice telling you to stop." The starting horn blared. Sarah launched forward, her shorter legs requiring more steps but moving with efficient, practiced rhythm. She'd run marathons, completed ultra-endurance events, survived Hell Week. 2 miles was painful but manageable. She focused on her breathing, on maintaining form, on conserving just enough energy for what came after. The first mile passed in a blur. Her legs burned, her lungs ached, but she maintained pace. The second mile grew harder. The course's hills took their toll, and the 50 pounds of gear felt like it was doubling with each step. Spectators lined portions of the route cheering, but their voices were just noise. At mile 1.75, her legs nearly gave out. The fatigue from her sleepless night crashed over her like a wave. For a moment, she stumbled, her vision blurring. "Chen, push." Rodriguez's voice cut through the fog. He'd positioned himself at this section specifically, knowing it was the hardest point. Sarah found something deeper, that reserve that separated those who finished from those who quit. She drove her legs harder, pushing through pain that would have stopped most people. 13 minutes, 48 seconds. She crossed the finish line 16 seconds faster than Hawk's run. But the run was only half the battle. Her heart hammered at 178 beats per minute. Her hands shook visibly. Sweat stung her eyes. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the firing position, knowing she had maybe 90 seconds before the fatigue overcame her adrenaline. She dropped into position, the rifle feeling impossibly heavy. Through her scope, the target swam in and out of focus. Her breathing was ragged, uncontrolled. This was the moment Hawk was counting on, that her smaller frame, her exhaustion, her sleepless night would all compound to destroy her accuracy. Sarah closed her eyes. 3 seconds. That's all she allowed herself. 3 seconds to find the calm center, the quiet place where her mother had taught her to exist regardless of external chaos. She opened her eyes. Her heart rate was still elevated but dropping. 160, 145. She controlled her breathing, forcing the rhythm despite her body's screaming demand for oxygen. The hostile target appeared. A hostage flanked it. She held fire. The targets changed. Hostile alone. Her finger moved to the trigger, but her hands were still shaking too much. She waited, letting her heart rate drop further. 120 beats per minute. Still too high for precision shooting. Normal resting was 60. But she didn't have time to wait for normal. The clock was running. Sarah made a decision. Instead of fighting the tremor in her hands, she worked with it. She timed her shot to the rhythm of her elevated heartbeat, squeezing the trigger in the microsecond between beats when her body was naturally still. It was a technique her mother had taught her for biathlon, shooting while the heart still raced from skiing. Trust the rhythm. Become one with it. The hostile appeared alone. Sarah found the rhythm beat, stillness, beat, stillness. On the third stillness, she fired. Crack! The bullet flew true, 800 yards of perfect ballistic arc. Hit dead center. Time, 14 minutes 51 seconds. The crowd erupted. Sarah had beaten Hawk's time by a full minute and 27 seconds. More importantly, she'd made a perfect shot while completely exhausted. She safed her weapon and stood, her legs threatening to buckle. Danny rushed forward to steady her, grinning like a madman. "You did it. Holy shit, you actually did it." But Sarah's eyes found Hawk across the range. He stood absolutely still, his face cycling through every emotion human beings were capable of experiencing. This was his identity dying in real time, his sense of self being fundamentally challenged. Colonel Briggs's voice boomed across the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new champion." The crowd's roar was deafening. Sarah had done more than win a shooting competition. She'd shattered every assumption, exceeded every expectation, and proved that excellence had no prerequisites except dedication and skill. The awards ceremony was scheduled for 1400 hours, giving competitors time to clean up and gather themselves. Sarah sat alone in the barracks shower room long after the water had run cold, letting exhaustion wash over her now that the adrenaline had finally drained away. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed. Her hands, always so steady during shooting, now trembled with fatigue. But she'd won. The reality of it hadn't fully settled in yet. 15 years of this competition, hundreds of the military's elite snipers, and she'd just posted the highest combined score in the event's history. Not just won, dominated. A knock on the shower room door interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am," Danny's voice called. "Ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Colonel Briggs wants all competitors in dress uniform." "Copy that," Sarah called back. "I'll be ready." She forced herself to stand, dress, and face what came next. The ceremony took place on the main parade ground, a large open area where the entire base could gather. A temporary stage had been erected, flanked by American flags and the flags of each military branch. Bleachers held easily 1,000 spectators. Word had spread far beyond the competition itself. Local news crews filmed everything. This had become an event. Sarah stood in formation with the other competitors, her dress blues crisp and perfect despite her exhaustion. 2 positions to her left stood Hawk, his face an unreadable mask. They hadn't spoken since her victory. The tension between them was palpable. Colonel Briggs took the podium, his weathered face stern but his eyes bright with something that might have been pride. "For 15 years," he began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "this competition has brought together the finest precision shooters our military produces. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Scout Snipers, Air Force Special Operations, the best of the best, competing to determine who among them stands supreme." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This year, we witnessed something unprecedented. Not just in terms of scores, though Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's performance shattered multiple records. No, what we witnessed was something more fundamental, a challenge to our assumptions about what excellence looks like." Sarah felt every eye shift to her. "Many of you," Briggs continued, his tone hardening, "doubted Lieutenant Commander Chen from the moment she arrived. Some of you mocked her. Some of you actively worked against her. And why? Not because of her qualifications, which are impeccable. Not because of her performance, which proved exceptional. You doubted her because she didn't fit your preconceived image of what a warrior should look like." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Briggs was calling them out publicly, and he didn't care who it offended. "But here's what I want you to understand," the colonel said. "Excellence has no gender. It has no predetermined shape or size. It has only one requirement: performance under pressure. Can you execute when it matters? Can you deliver when lives depend on it? Can you maintain your standards when everything around you is chaos?" He gestured to Sarah. Lieutenant Commander Chen answered those questions definitively. Perfect qualification round. Highest scores in adverse conditions. A 1,500-yard shot that will be talked about for decades. And a final performance that combined physical endurance with mental precision in a way I've rarely seen in my 38 years of service. Briggs lifted the championship trophy, a bronze statue of a sniper in position, mounted on a walnut base engraved with the names of all previous winners. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, front and center. Sarah marched forward, her movements precise despite her exhaustion. She came to attention before the colonel, saluted, and held it. Briggs returned the salute, then handed her the trophy. It was heavier than she'd expected, substantial and real in her hands. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander. You've earned this, and you've taught us all something about assumptions and excellence." The crowd erupted in applause. It started with Danny and Rodriguez, spread to the competitors who'd supported her through the night, then rippled outward until even the skeptics were clapping. It was genuine now, respect earned through undeniable performance. Sarah accepted the trophy, fighting to keep her emotions in check. She hadn't let herself feel anything during the competition, couldn't afford to. But now, holding this symbol of validation, everything threatened to overwhelm her. Then from the formation movement, Hawk stepped forward. The applause died as everyone watched to see what would happen. Hawk approached Sarah with slow, deliberate steps. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, but his eyes held something different than before. He came to attention and saluted her. The gesture was significant. A chief petty officer didn't salute a lieutenant commander under normal circumstances except in specific ceremonial contexts. But this wasn't about rank. This was about respect between warriors. Sarah returned the salute, holding it. "I was wrong," Hawk said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "About everything. I questioned your abilities based on prejudice, not evidence. I let my ego and my insecurity drive my behavior. You didn't just beat me, Lieutenant Commander. You showed me what real professionalism looks like. You faced mockery, sabotage, and doubt, and you responded by letting your performance speak for itself." He lowered his salute and extended his hand. "You earned this championship. You earned my respect, and you've earned your place among the best operators in this military." This time Sarah took his hand. The handshake was firm, genuine, witnessed by 1,000 people. "Thank you, Chief," she said simply. "That took courage to say publicly." "Less courage than you showed all week," Hawk replied. A ghost of his old grin appeared. "Besides, I've got a year to train before the next competition. You just set the bar impossibly high." "Good," Sarah said. "Competition makes us all better." As they shook hands, the crowd erupted again, louder this time, celebrating not just a winner but a moment of genuine growth and change. Later, after the ceremony concluded and the crowds dispersed, Colonel Briggs pulled Sarah aside to his office. "Congratulations again, Lieutenant Commander, but I didn't ask you here just for that." He gestured to a chair. "I'm recommending you for a new position, Advanced Sniper Instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center. You'd be training the next generation of SEAL snipers." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, that's an incredible opportunity." "You've proven you have the skills," Briggs said. "But more than that, you've proven you can maintain professional standards under extreme pressure. You can teach not just marksmanship, but mental resilience, integrity, and what it means to represent excellence regardless of what people assume about you." "When would this start?" 60 days. Finish your current assignment, take some leave. God knows you've earned it, then report to Coronado." Briggs smiled. "Fair warning, you'll be teaching classes that include people who doubted you, some who mocked you. Can you handle that?" Sarah thought about Hawk's transformation, about Danny's loyalty, about Rodriguez and the others who'd stood with her through the night. "Sir, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's helping them become better than they thought possible. If I can teach the next generation to focus on performance instead of prejudice, to evaluate people based on their skills rather than their appearance, that's worth more than any championship." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Briggs stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the instructor cadre, Lieutenant Commander. Try not to break too many records. You're making the rest of us look bad." Sarah left his office and found Danny and Rodriguez waiting outside with several other competitors. "So," Danny asked eagerly, "what did the colonel want?" "He offered me an instructor position," Sarah said, "teaching advanced sniper techniques at Coronado." Rodriguez whistled. "That's serious, you going to take it?" "Already did." "Good," the Marine said, "because I've got about 1,000 questions about how you read wind patterns, and I'm tired of guessing." What started as a simple question turned into an impromptu class right there in the hallway. Sarah found herself explaining techniques, sharing insights, demonstrating calculations. More operators joined, first 5, then 10, then 20. They sat on the floor, stood against walls, all listening intently as Sarah taught. Hawk arrived late, standing at the back of the group. When Sarah noticed him, she paused. "Chief, you have experience with extreme distance shooting in combat. Want to share some real-world applications?" It was an olive branch, an invitation to be part of something collaborative instead of competitive. Hawk stepped forward, and together they taught. the three-time champion and the new champion, sharing knowledge freely with the next generation. The final scene showed Sarah 3 weeks later, standing on a range at Coronado Naval Base. Before her stood a class of 32 SEAL candidates, men and women, diverse backgrounds, united by their desire to become the best. "Welcome to advanced sniper training," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the range. "Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to teach you everything I know about precision shooting. Some of you are stronger than me, some are faster, some have more combat experience. None of that matters here." She gestured to the targets downrange. "The only thing that matters is this. Can you make the shot when it counts? Can you perform under pressure? Can you maintain your standards when your body is exhausted, your mind is screaming to quit, and everyone around you doubts you can succeed?" She paused, meeting their eyes. "Because that's what separates good shooters from great ones. Not your gender, not your background, not what anyone assumes about you, just your ability to execute when it matters most." A hand raised, a young female ensign, barely 23 years old, looking nervous but determined. "Ma'am, is it true you shot a perfect qualification round at the inter-service competition?" Sarah smiled. "It's true. Want to know how?" 32 heads nodded eagerly. "Then grab your rifles, let's get to work." As the class moved to the firing line, Sarah watched them with satisfaction. This was her victory, not the trophy sitting in her quarters, but this moment. These students who would learn that excellence had no prerequisites except dedication and skill. She'd silence doubt with undeniable performance. And now she'd teach others to do the same. The end.